This khilafah that comes about, or has to come about within the human self, differs radically from any modern Western image of human psychology, in that it affirms that not only do we have a self, but we have a soul. Or perhaps to use slightly clearer vocabulary, not only do we have a self, but we have a spirit. There is nafs, which is the self. There is ruh, which is the spirit. Now, the nafs can never be done away with, because it is the self, and you can't lose yourself while remaining possessed of an identity. The nafs is very elusive. One of the hardest subjects in traditional Islam is talk about the self, because it's hard for an entity to perceive itself. One reason why you need a teacher, a mirror. But the Quran makes it quite clear that there are different degrees of the soul. The context for the full exposition of this would be elsewhere, but briefly it speaks of an-nafs al-ammara bis-su', the self that commands evil, that is to say, the passional self, that which is unrestrained by any intuitive knowledge of the virtues derived from the fitrah, or any explicit knowledge of the virtues derived from a written revelation. And it just craves immediate gratification and pays no attention to the debased consequences of that. We could say that modern society is based on the glorification of that nafs. The only limits being where the nafs's right to self-gratification clashes with some other nafs's right to self-gratification. And that's the basis of the Western social contract. And that's really all that people now believe in. That's the sum total of modern education. That, yeah, the world is the here and now, it is all that exists, the body is the absolute. Human fulfillment and satisfaction comes about through maximizing sense gratification and self-esteem. Go through life acquiring experiences, so that at the end of your life you can look back on a kind of stamp collection of interesting experiences that you've picked up from here and there. The only rule is, don't get in the way of other people's right to do the same thing. Don't do that, but anything else that's halal for you. And that's the only real sharia, the only moral absolute that the modern world still is concerned with. And modern discourses on human rights, for the most part, no more than just that. Don't get in the way of other people's lower desires. Now, there are higher aspects of the self as well, which have not been entirely forgotten, even by many people in the modern world. Because we are of the fitrah, people do have a sense of natural knowledge. And there is an-nafs al-lawwama, another Quranic term, the guilt-ridden soul, the soul that blames itself perpetually. Lawwama is an emphatic form. And this is where we are still following the desires of this lower self for immediate gratification of animal desires, which are not just to do with the senses but also to do with ego, with self-esteem, because the animals have a sense of ego and self-respect, just as human beings do. It's not just about lust and gluttony. But afterwards we feel a little bit degraded by the experience. That's an-nafs al-lawwama. This is the condition of most humanity, in the past as in the present. And the final degree is an-nafs al-mutma'inna. And this is the degree that is hardly ever reached in our stress-ridden world. Despite the endlessly repeated claim of modernity to bring about human happiness, the reality seems to be quite otherwise. The oldest cliche in the preacher's vocabulary is that material pleasures do not bring about happiness. People more or less know that, but what else do they have? So they run after them. But the soul at peace, which is the Adamic soul, the soul that has turned around and has seen the light, where is that in our age? Can modernity produce it? Modernity produces people who yearn for it. The religions, new religions, older religions, are still in business. But where is the saint? What is the performative nature of the traditional religions and the new religious movements? Are they really producing awliya? Is the style of education that they commend actually working in producing really transformed human beings? In the case of Protestantism, certainly not, because one of the founding principles of Protestantism that there really are no saints. A person who is close to God is a person who is morally good, and who is in Christ, who is following the scriptures. But the traditional Christian idea of sainthood, a person of infinite goodness, a miracle worker, whose blessings may continue even after his or her death, Protestants explicitly swept that away, and that was one major step by which Europe became secularized. The sacred in human form was abolished. In some circles in the Islamic world today there is a comparable Protestant move. Go back to the scriptures, be a moral person, obey all of the rules, and that's wilaya. That's all that the Quran and the Hadith are requiring of you. Nothing higher, nothing more impressive. Just be a good boy and you'll go to heaven. Which from the perspective of all traditional religion is an appalling debasement.